Good evening. Good evening and welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the world premiere of the new film by Steven Spielberg, The Fabelmans. My name is Cameron Bailey. I'm the CEO here at TIFF. I'm so glad to see you all here. We would love to get you settled so that we can start the film as soon as possible. We're very pleased to be presenting it here in this beautiful theater, the Visa Screening Room at the Princess of Wales. Thank you to our longtime major sponsor, Visa Canada, for making that possible. And a big thank you also to our lead sponsor, Bell, and our major sponsors, RBC and Bulgari, for their continued support. We're also here thanks to the support of many of our public partners, the Government of Canada, the Government of Ontario, Telefilm Canada, and the City of Toronto. A reminder, and you're going to want to pay attention to this. This film is eligible for the People's Choice Award. It is our most important prize. You decide who wins, so please remember to vote. You go online to tiff.net/vote to vote for the films of your choice. Big thanks to Universal Pictures for providing us with this film, and to Amblin as well. And now, on behalf of the Toronto International Film Festival, on behalf of you, our amazing Toronto audiences, and on behalf of me, as a 12-year-old immigrant kid discovering film, I want to introduce you to a director who has fired our imaginations as he consistently pushed the art of movies forward. Please join me in welcoming one of the world's greatest filmmakers, Steven Spielberg.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that lovely welcome. And I'm honored to be here in Toronto. This is the first film festival I have ever had one of my directed films officially enter. So I think that's true. After 34 films, I finally got around to figuring out that Toronto was a great audience and I should take my movie and let it break here for the first time. I don't want to say too much. The film pretty much certainly speaks for me and Tony Kushner. We wrote it together. 75 years of life experience went into this. That's all I want to say. And I'm just so grateful that it's here and we get to debut this worldwide debut absolutely for all of you. So thank you. We'll see you afterwards. Thank you.
Please join me in welcoming to the stage the producer and co-writer of The Fabelmans, Tony Kushner. And the cast, Judd Hirsch, Seth Rogen, Paul Dano, Gabriel LaBelle, Michelle Williams, and the co-writer and director of The Fabelmans, Steven Spielberg. You forgot me. It's okay. We're gonna have to start. I'm so sorry. Thank you all. Thank you all so much. We're all overwhelmed by the film, I think it's fair to say. It's so beautifully made, such a powerful story, such heart, such joy in the film. I want to begin, Stephen, by asking you, this is the most personal film that we've ever seen from you. Why was now the time to make The Fabelmans?
First, I want to say I'm really glad we came to Toronto.
Yes, we are too.
Really glad. You got to watch it without all the subtitles. It was great. It's not complicated, and it's not really the reason I did this now. This is something, obviously, I've been thinking about for a long time. And I didn't really know when I was going to get around to this. It is not because I've decided to retire and this is my swan song. I promise. Don't believe any of that. Don't believe that. Tony and I started talking about this possibility when we were making Lincoln together. This was the first time we sat down, and then Tony kind of performed the function of a therapist, and and I was his patient, and we talked, and I talked for a long time, and Tony fed me and helped me through this. But when COVID hit, and that was before COVID, when COVID hit, we all had a lot of time, and we all had a lot of fear. And I don't think anybody knew in March or April of 2020 what was going to be the state of the art and the state of life even a year from then. And I think in that sense, I felt, as things got worse and worse, that I just felt that if I was going to leave anything behind, what is the thing that I really need to resolve and unpack about my mom, my dad, and my sisters who are here tonight, Anne, Sue, and Nancy. Yeah. Stand up wherever you are. Right. And it was, and I just felt that it wasn't now or never, but I almost felt that way.
Now, when you're putting together the cast for your film, you've cast some great actors in some of their greatest performances, but you're casting your family, essentially, or a version of your family, a fictional version of your family. How did you arrive at this particular group of remarkable actors for the different roles? Your father, your mother, yourself, in a way, as a boy, as well as the other members of the family.
Well, part of it obviously is, it had to feel organic and it had to feel authentic to me, and it wasn't really about anything beyond who can I have the most profound connection with that reminds me the most of the people that brought me into the world and raised me and gave me good values and my mom gave me a ton of permission to chase tornadoes, metaphorically, for my entire life. And I had flipped out, as Michelle knows, because the first time I met her, I had just seen Blue Valentine, and I asked to meet her. I had no movie for her, but I just wanted to meet the person who did Blue Valentine. And so she was always lingering as a sort of frontal lobe idea about Mitzi, or my mom Leah, and then I had felt the same way about Paul. He shares so many of the same kind of pragmatism, also the patience of my dad, the deep, profound kindness of my father, and the genius that my dad had in the world of computer design. And so immediately, those were the first two characters that Tony and I started to discuss, and Christy McCosco, and Tony and I started talking about Paul and you, Michelle. Yeah.
Michelle, I want to ask you as well what it was like to be directed by Steven in this particular film, given the intimacy with which he knew the character, or some version of the character. What was it like to work on that character together?
It felt like a couple of kids on the playground. It just felt like we were, felt like anything was possible. It felt like a place where it just felt like we were climbing every day. Like I just felt like we were sort of like exploring together, and he would say like, go over here, and then I would run over there, and I would say, look what I found over here, and then I would bring it back, and he would say, that's really fun to play with, and every day was joy, and I've never been so early to get to work.
Nice. Paul, we see from the film that Sam's mother and father really created who he was. He has both halves of them, the creative side and the very skilled technical side as well. So as the father playing that role, what were you bringing to that to create that side that really became part of young Steven?
Well, we were blessed with a really beautiful script to build our characters from by Steven and Tony. And Steven was also very generous about letting us into his life. So I think Steven and I probably Zoomed, not quite once a week, but for several months, talking about him and his life, and had access to photographs and home movies and sound recordings. The goal was to sort of, how do you capture a life lived? How do you fill out the essence of that in a 2.5-hour film? I think Burt and Arnold were both like a sort of quintessential American man in a way, especially in that time. And it really reminded me of my grandfather as well, so I was trying to bring something from my life along with me to make it equally personal. And it was it was a heavy cloak to bear at times, playing Steven's father, and the spell that we sort of all had going on the sound stages, but a beautiful experience. Thank you.
I want to ask also about what we really see, and we know a little bit about this, but in the film it's illuminated so well how you grew up in a Jewish family in mostly not Jewish environments at all. You were outsiders, you stood out, and you were often bullied. And the high school scenes are painful to watch for anybody who's been through that sort of thing. I want to ask a little bit about bringing that part of your life out on screen. We've seen through the course of your films a kind of growing engagement with your Jewish identity, and you see the character coming to terms with it in the film. But what was it like to weave that into the film? Tony, I want to ask you about writing that part of the story as well, and I'm interested in all of the actors' responses, especially Judd Hirsch. You've got those wonderful scenes where you're challenging him, which is just fantastic.
I felt silly. No, Steven never told me what we were going to do.
Okay.
So instead of, knowing what we were going to do, we just did it. In fact, I even asked him, I said, what about the real guy? And he said he never understood a word he said.
His accent was so thick.
Yes. Steven, Tony, do you want to address that?
But the bullying is only a small aspect of my life. The anti-Semitism is an aspect of my life, but it isn't any kind of a governing force in my life, but it made me very, very aware of being an outsider early on. I have to also say that when I was bullied in my senior year in high school, it was only 2 guys, like represented in the film. The school did not bully me. The school was fine. It was just 2 individuals. It usually is that. It's not a reflection of the institution of that particular high school. And it was an aspect of my life. I wanted to get into the movie, but it wasn't meant to be the theme of the film at all.
Okay. Boy, those 2 guys, sorry, I'm sure now. Tony, was there anything you wanted to add on that subject?
No, I mean, I think what Stephen is saying, I think it's in proportion in the film. It's an aspect of his experience at that moment, and it's part of his arc, Sammy's arc, towards reclaiming film and figuring out things that film can do, and also the way that film is an unreliable friend. It'll take you into a place of safety and then right through safety into something unexpected and scary, and it does this over and over again in the movie, and the last moment of that in the film is with the Sammy, and I think Stephen did this, drives a wedge between this unholy pair and splits them up and expects to sort of have a victory of that. And he gets a victory, but he gets something really unexpected as a result. So I think that's the real role of it. I like very much the sort of easy way that Jewishness lives in this movie. That it's a very profound part of Stephen's identity and of the Fabelmans' identity, but it's a movie that's about Jewish people rather than entirely and exclusively about Jewishness or anti-Semitism or something. So it's not a problem; it's who they are, and I like the way that it lives in the film. So
I want to also ask you just about the filmmaking, the techniques that you learned as a young boy. I love that scene where you're figuring out how to do special effects kind of in camera and with the film stock itself. And that's just so joyous, I think, for anybody who loves movies and saw what you began to do with effects and all of the ground you broke later on, to see a young version of yourself discovering how to use the magic of movies to really transform people. Can you talk a little bit about those sequences?
Well, there were no Pro Tools in 1961. So it was really, using glue and spit and trying to figure out, how to put things together, because I would go to the movies all the time. I constantly went to the movies, and I just, it was like, that was like the church. You go into a movie, in those days the theaters were like tabernacles. They were extraordinary palaces. And I go to these movies all the time, and I didn't understand how they got, even The Greatest Show on Earth, when you look at the effects of C.B. DeMille's movie at the beginning of this movie, those effects kind of make you kind of laugh a little bit, because they were what they had at their disposal in 1952. But when I was trying to figure out, well, how do I make explosions like all the war movies I'm watching on TV, like the Sands of Iwo Jima and all of that, how do I do those explosions? I just figured out that if you take a board and you dig 2 holes, you put the board on top of the holes like a seesaw, and you put dirt on one end, and the kid steps on the other, it throws the dirt in the air, and that's an explosion. I mean, that's what I used to do to make my war movies. So all the depictions of the films within the film were pretty much, the tools that myself and other friends of mine who came up with great ideas of how to make things look really cool in those days. And it was really cool to shoot that behind-the-scenes stuff. That was fun to do. And I made all the behind-the-scenes stuff in this movie much better than the actual 8mm films I shot when I was Sammy's age. Much better in this. I had a chance to do it. It was a do-over. It was great to do it over. It was fantastic.
I haven't heard from the 2 Canadians on stage yet, but I would like to. Seth Rogen and Gabriel LaBelle. Seth, I want to start with you. There's not really a bad guy in the movie, but your character does end up being pivotal in what happens to the Fabelmans' marriage. Can you talk a little bit about playing the shades of that? Because it is quite nuanced. He's not simply a villain.
No, I didn't think so at all. I thought in the greater context of the film, the man had to be very lovable and someone who you really understood why people were drawn to him and why they liked being around him and what he had to offer, this dynamic. And I was very aware that, Michelle was ultimately going to leave Paul for me. And so that's a lot of pressure, like how do you make the audience not completely just conceptually reject that was a thought I had a lot. But it was beautifully written again, and me and Stephen talked a lot about, the real man and the type of energy he brought into these situations, the type of dynamic he would have with his mother and the kids, and honestly, I just wanted to try to bring it to life in the best way I envisioned it from these conversations that Stephen was, generous enough to have. So, I just wanted to not completely blow it.
Beautifully done.
And when Seth came to the set the first day, and he was in his short hair and his glasses and clean shaven, and we were all saying, "Wow, he's a really hot '50s dad." So this is going to completely work. So.
Finally, I found my era.
Yes.
Gabrielle, I want to ask you about how you were cast for this film and what it was like to work with Steven Spielberg. This is a big role for you. It's a great performance. It's a real discovery, and we're so glad to see what you did.
Well, thank you. I auditioned, and I got an audition, and it was for an untitled Amblin film, director to be decided, writer to be decided, executive producer, and I didn't know what it was. And 2 scenes, I audition, I throw it out there, and then like 2 days later, I'm asking about it if we've heard any feedback, and they go, "Yeah, I think that was like a Steven Spielberg movie," and I think that your character was Steven Spielberg. and I'm like, "Oh my God." And then I keep getting I come across these articles, and Michelle Williams is attached, Paul Dano, Seth Rogen, and I keep calling my agents, what's going on? And they don't hear anything back. So I don't get it. And then 3 months later, in late May, I get a text. They want a callback. And 2 days from then, I Zoom with Cindy Tolan, and 2 days from then, I Zoom with Steven, and your face was probably a little too close to the camera, and sitting there waiting for a callback with Steven Spielberg, and you're like meditating and like breathing through it, and then boom, there you are with your cigar. It was very nerve-wracking after I'd gotten cast, because I hadn't gotten the script until after that Deadline article was dropped, and the character's name was still Teenage Sammy. So I get the script, and I'm folding every page, 30 pages in. Okay, this is my act, and the next act's going to be an adult, so I'm folding every page. This is the one I have to, and then I just stop folding them, because I'm in everything. And nobody told me that. And so it was very spooky. It was horrifying, and I have all this stuff to do, and because you're surrounded by masters. You get to sit and you're surrounded by masters, writing, directing, acting, producing, cinematography, costumes, props, music, editing, everything, just masters of this art. And then there's me. And I'm that kid with that good audition. So it was very.
Well, you killed it. You killed it.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. So one last question. Go ahead.
2 days into shooting, Gabriel never didn't stop thinking that about me, about Tony, about anybody else. He was part of the company, and we just went to work. And so that was something that was, I can understand hearing that story now, how intimidating that must be. But then the family started to fit together, and then we really became a family.
100%.
With a lot of emotion on the set, too, as we went through this. I want to just acknowledge a couple of things right now. I don't know if Mateo's still here. The young Sammy, Mateo, and Reggie, and Reggie and Natalie. That's Mateo, our young Sammy, and if Keely and Julia could stand, please. Woo! Natalie and Reggie, the sisters. And I'd also like to find in the audience Monica Chloe East. Monica, where are you? There's Monica. Okay.
Just one last question, Stephen, I wanted to ask you. You know, those of us who have followed your career for many, many years will sometimes see what we think are watershed films for you. Jaws changed things for you, I'm sure. Color Purple, I think, probably changed things for you. Schindler's List, I think, probably changed things for you. Is The Fabelmans a watershed film for you? Will things change for you after this?
You know something, I didn't know any of those films changed me until 20 years after each one of them, actually. But I will say that this film is, for me, is a way of bringing my mom and dad back. And it also brought my sisters, Annie and Susie and Nancy, closer to me than I ever thought possible. And that was worth making the film for.
Well, thank you. Thank you for bringing the film to Toronto and the Toronto audience. We're so pleased to have launched The Fabelmans here.
Thank you.
Please join me once again in thanking Tony Kushner, Judd Hirsch, Seth Rogen, Paul Dano, Gabriel LaBelle, Michelle Williams, and Steven Spielberg. Thank you also.
Thank you.